Hello, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me well. Hi. Okay. So I think we are in a good place to start. I see most of our participants are here, or a good chunk of you have arrived. Hello, everybody. Nice to see you. So we'll get started with the webinar. Hello and welcome, everybody, to our webinar on exporting to the United Kingdom. Bienvenue à toutes et à tous. My name is Gabrielle Echeverry, for those of you who don't know me, and I'll be here to introduce our presenters and help facilitate the Q&A session at the end of their presentation. But before we begin in earnest, I would like to respectfully acknowledge that Livre Canada Books is situated on the unceded traditional territories of the Algonquin peoples. Today's presentation will be given in English. Should take about 60 minutes, including the time set aside at the end for your questions. La présentation d'aujourd'hui sera en anglais et devrait durer environ 60 minutes et nous avons prévu du temps à la fin pour répondre à vos questions. Pour accéder à l'interprétation vers le français, cliquez sur l'icône au bas de votre écran dans les commandes pour la réunion. L'icône ressemble à une globe. So for those of you who need interpretation, it will mostly be into French today because the majority of the presentation will be in English, but my understanding is that Simon speaks French very well and will be able to answer any questions in French if needed. So click the interpretation icon in your meeting controls at the bottom of your screen. It should look like a globe. Pour ceux qui vont utiliser l'interprétation, sélectionnez la langue de votre choix et aussi mute original audio. So if you are going to use the interpretation function, please click the language that you'd like to hear and make sure to select the mute original audio function as well. For those who do not require interpretation, please leave the interpretation feature off. After the presentation is complete, we'll be taking questions in both languages via the Q&A function, which should be on the bottom of your screen. But please feel free to submit questions throughout the presentation in the Q&A screen, and we'll collect them at the end. So nous vous invitons à poser des questions via la fonction questions-réponses. N'hésitez pas à soumettre vos questions tout au long du webinaire. Nous les recueillerons pour la séance de questions qui aura lieu à la fin. If you encounter any problems or have questions relating to the platform, please message me as the host and via the chat function. Si vous rencontrez des problèmes ou si vous avez des questions au sujet de la plateforme, veuillez m'envoyer un message privé en tant que host. So without further ado, we are very pleased to be hosting today's webinar, providing key insights on exporting to the UK. The United Kingdom is a well-established export market for publishers from other English language markets, as well as an important market for publishers from other territories. Its publishing industry is prolific and diverse, with an active book reading and book buying public, easy internal communications, and national media coverage. The UK is also relatively easy to access, with very few import restrictions or taxation barriers. Nevertheless, this market has undergone a series of significant upheavals in the last 5 years that have impacted the publishing industry and book market in general. I'm delighted to introduce today's speakers, Emma House and Simon Littlewood, who will be giving us a glimpse into this market and the opportunities and challenges there for Canadian publishers. Emma is an international publishing consultant with broad knowledge of the publishing industry globally and a strong network of contacts across publishers, agents, distributors, and booksellers developed over 20 years in the industry. She is the former deputy CEO of the Publishers Association, where she worked for 11 years, and prior to this, she worked at the London Book Fair at various posts. She is co-founder of the Facebook group Publishers Without Borders, which I hope many of you are already members of. It's a great group. She's an advisor for the organization Civic on a future libraries project for the UK public library sector, project manager for Quick Reads, an adult literacy initiative run by the Reading Agency, and also works as a consultant to the Sharjah Book Authority. Simon, our second presenter today, is an advisor, consultant, and coach to a range of international book industry companies and government organizations, and has held positions in trade, academic, and professional, educational, and illustrated publishing in the UK for over 30 years. He was a founder director of Pan Macmillan South Africa, and later took senior roles at Phaidon Press and Headline Book Publishing before becoming international director of the Random House Group, now part of Penguin Random House, in 1997, a post he held until 2014. Since then, he has represented the UK Publishers Association on the executive of the Federation of European Publishers in Brussels. And from 2014 to 2019, he fulfilled the same role at the International Publishers Association in Geneva. Welcome, Emma and Simon. Thank you for joining us today. I'll turn the mic over to you so you can get started.
Well, thank you very much, Gabrielle. Merci. Good day, everyone. Bonjour à tout le monde. And it's a pleasure and privilege to be connecting and in some cases reconnecting with such a varied and interesting group of publishers from a country that on a personal note has had great meaning for me throughout my life. We're aware from studying the list of today's audience that it's not only the nature of your publishing that varies widely, but also the level of experience and engagement with the UK market across your group. So it's been incumbent on us to find the right denominator level in our remarks today. And we'd ask you to bear with us at those moments when that might diverge from your individual position. We'll seek to keep them as generally relevant as possible. And if we might now have the next slide, I'll just do a quick skedaddle through what we're proposing to cover this evening. So we're going to give you a sense of the market in statistical terms, because we think that that background is very important for you. What is the nature and size of what you're dealing with? We'll talk a bit about the stuff that sells. We'll give you a good picture of the structure of the contemporary retail market, the library market, some thoughts about how to get into it, because after all, that is a main subject of tonight's performance, shall I say. We'll talk a bit about then distributors and wholesalers, and also the backup activity to being present in the market, the publicity, the sales and the marketing. I'll talk a bit about the rights market and the academic market in the United Kingdom. And then Emma will talk about children's market. I'll talk about graphic novels. So you'll see we're boxing and coxing, she and I, through this agenda so that we can give you the best of our knowledge. I'll talk a bit about dear old Brexit, shall I put it? And then we'll give you some contacts. So without more ado, let me embark upon the market and its size. Some of you may be aware of these statistics, but in fact, they are the most recently documented, and therefore they're extremely current and show you just on this range of bullet points the kind of market you're dealing with and where it sits in the world. So it's the 5th largest book market after the United States, China, Japan, and Germany. And thus it is, of course, the 2nd largest English language book market. In 2021, the revenues recovered to their highest level ever, in fact, and people were very encouraged that this went above the pre-pandemic levels. So the home market is worth £2.7 billion, and I should just let you know that this is at publisher value, publisher invoiced value, and that was up 7% year on year. It's a pretty much unique feature of the UK market that the proportion represented by sales made outside the home market is 57%. 57% of the publisher revenues are generated, and the value of that was up 2% year on year. In terms of the balance within the market, it's 56% consumer, as you see, 37% academic, and 7% education. I won't dwell too much on the remaining figures here, except to say that in consumer, print is 82% of the total and digital is 18%, a figure that has settled down to that level over the last 2 or 3 years. Last year, consumer print was up 3%, and in fact, digital a bit down. And that's been an interesting statistic to remark upon in the context of the pandemic and the surge in print sales. Academic sales were plus 14% year on year. Overall, then, if you spoke to people surveying this industry in the UK, they would say it's bounced back to a state of very considerable health. Next, please.
So just to run through some of the genres that are popular in the UK, and these tend not to change, but there are some trends that come and go. So looking at the trade fiction market, romance is always popular, particularly around the summertime when people are planning their holidays. Thrillers and crime will always appear in the bestseller charts, and we have a new genre, if you like, called cozy crime, which really came about at the start of the pandemic. So a typical author of the cozy crime genre would be Richard Osman. So thrillers, crimes, problems to solve, but not too much blood and gore and murders. And film and TV tie-ins are always very popular as well. Obviously, celebrity memoirs are out there, as anywhere in the world. Prince Harry's book did particularly well in the UK, as you can imagine. On the non-fiction side, cookbooks are very popular. They will always be in the top 10 of our bestseller lists, especially if it's from famous chefs, restaurants that have brought out cookbooks, or fad diets. So the Ultimate Air Fat Fryer cookbook is in the top 10 of the non-fiction charts at the moment. Psychology or self-help, but also big name history books. So the likes of Anthony Beevor, whenever he brings out a new history book, that will always do very well. On the children's side of things, and I will go into this in a little bit more detail, but celebrity authors really do dominate our charts, and they're often celebrity authors that don't travel so well. So they may be TV personalities that are very big in the UK and therefore do very well in the book scene. Brands are particularly popular, very recognizable for parents to pick up, or TV tie-ins. So anything that's in a cartoon or a children's TV show, if there's a book associated with that, that will do very well. Going into a little bit more detail on the children's market in the age 5 to 12, the particular themes that are popular at the moment would be books about space, eco themes, and anything that's particularly funny. Funny books, laugh out loud books do very well at that age range. And detective series are becoming popular, especially if they've got a bit of a travel theme to them. So that might work well with some of the books that are coming out of Canada. The YA market has exploded, particularly because of TikTok. TikTok does particularly well in selling things like feminist fantasy. We call them locked room mysteries. So the US author Karen McManus is doing very well at the moment. And LGBT series books. So those are the ones that are doing particularly well at the moment. The Bookseller magazine publishes a chart every week. And so if you're interested in looking on a weekly basis or dipping in and seeing what the bestsellers are, then I would recommend going to the Bookseller magazine website. So just to give you a bit of insight into how the retail market works in the UK, a bit like Canada, the number of bookstore chains has been diminishing over the years. Waterstones is by far our biggest bookshop chain. They now own Foyles, Blackwell's and Hatchards, as well as Barnes & Noble in the US. And then WH Smith is the other bookstore retail chain, and they tend to have the airport stores as well. And then Eason's is the big Irish bookshop chain as well. So in terms of the high street presence, dividing it between independents and chains, we're seeing the balance change to much more independents, and the bookstore chains are becoming less dominant. Although I think it's worth noting that Waterstones is doing very well at the moment. We then move on to our supermarkets. So these are our supermarket brands. All of them do stock a range of books and do very well at book selling. What really identifies this market, however, is that they generally only stock the best sellers. So probably not more than the top 50 best sellers in fiction, non-fiction, and children's books. And they command very high discounts. But they are a very good route to market for a number of publishers and for a number of titles. Independent bookstores are doing particularly well. When you get the slides afterwards, you'll find a lot of links embedded in this presentation. Again, if you go onto the Bookseller website and want to get a feel for the type of independent bookstores that we've got, you can have a look at the British Book Award shortlist for independent booksellers. And what I've listed here is a list of 670 indie bookstores across the country. There are many more than that, but this is a very good comprehensive guide to the indie bookstore in the country. They are growing, and that's noted in the membership of the Booksellers Association, which has once again noted an increase in its membership this year. What we are seeing is the emergence of niche booksellers in the independent side of things. So books, particularly for children's, bookstores, particularly for children's books, particularly for LGBT books, and the Round Table Bookstore, which has been running in Brixton, which specialises in books by Black and minority ethnic authors. So that is a really interesting feature coming up in the independent book market. E-commerce is thriving, as it is in many countries, very much dominated by Amazon. But we do have a new e-commerce store opened, which travelled across the ocean from the US, which is ukbookshop.org, which is an e-commerce window for independent retailers, but not just independent retailers. So literacy charities can have shelves on there, influencers can have shelves on there, and you will see a carousel of different books that have been specially picked out by the shop windows that choose to be on bookshop.org. And quite a large percentage of the revenue does go to UK bookstores, even though the orders are fulfilled directly by gardeners. So I do encourage you to go and check out ukbookshop.org. It's been fantastic for the independent book selling market. Although what independent booksellers will tell you is that it's probably its third or fourth channel to market by preference. They would always prefer to sell directly to the customer in the shop, but if not via their own websites, followed by bookshop.org. Another thing that we're seeing is the emergence and the broadening of our non-traditional book retailers, or special sales as they would be referred to within a publishing company. So books that sell lots of other things, shops that sell lots of other things other than books, that are now starting to get into the book market. They're generally served by Ingram or Baker & Taylor or other wholesalers or distributors that we will come on to later. So things like garden centres would also be another avenue that are starting to sell books. Museums do pick particularly well at selling books, often having their own publishing company as well. Ebooks and audiobooks, we saw reference to that in the statistics. During the pandemic, there was a big increase in e-commerce, but also in ebooks and audiobooks, but that's certainly leveled out again now. The market is very dominated by Kindle and Audible, so Amazon do very much dominate here. And we do also have Apple Books and Google Books, and a new player in the audiobook market is Zigzag, which is operating on the same model as Audible. What we're not seeing in the UK is the likes of Storytel, so paying a subscription and being able to consume lots of books, different to the way that Audible works. Reaching these markets will obviously be different to the print market, where we will talk a bit more about the need for distributors and wholesalers. And accessing these markets can be done directly from Canada. So the likes of eBound will be doing this for you already if you work through eBound or DeMarc. But you can obviously do that directly. There are distributors that specialize in distributing ebooks, audiobooks, podcasts, etc. So a couple of examples of those would be Bookwire, based out of Germany, but servicing publishers all over the world. Zebralution would be another one that distributes audiobooks and makes sure that you get into retail channels, not only in the UK, but all over the world. Things to think about when accessing the UK retail market. The first thing, and a very important thing, is to think about is cover design. The audience appeal of cover design is very different in the UK to the US, and you would only need to compare two versions of a number of different books, and you would get a flavour of the type of cover design that works well in the UK that, as I say, would be very different to the US. Really think about your supporting marketing material that you're able to provide, not only providing to your distributor, but also that can go directly to your own contacts, be them independent bookstores or the chains, or even marketing and communications directly to the consumer, which a lot of it, again, can be controlled in-house from Canada. And we'll come on to a little bit more about that later, but ensuring that you've got lots of really strong support in different marketing materials in different medium that can go, that can be really useful to backing up your campaign. And then when we move on to distributors and wholesalers, but having stock available in the UK is obviously essential. The public library market in the UK is an interesting one. Public libraries offer physical books, ebooks, and audiobooks. Authors do receive a payment every time a book is borrowed from a library, be that physical, ebook, or audiobook. We call that public lending right. And if you want to see the most popular books that are borrowed from libraries, then the public lending right list is made available and will show which authors and which books are most popular in public libraries. Physical stock still dominates very much the lending numbers, and we have a specialist wholesaler for that. So Askews and Holt is a specialist library wholesaler. We'll come on to talk about Gardners shortly, but they also supply the library market. Audiobooks and ebooks are generally delivered by the two aggregators, Belinda and Overdrive. And purchasing from public libraries is done at a local authority level. So we have 131 local authorities servicing thousands of libraries, so almost 4,000 public libraries. But the purchasing will not be done at an individual library level, it will be done at a local authority level. Book budgets are quite tight. They're certainly nowhere near as generous as the US public library market, but nonetheless, they are a market that shouldn't be forgotten about.
Good, Em, thank you very much. We're now going to shift away from retail towards the wholesale sector. And if we take the next slide, we can just do a little semantic run here, because it's important to understand the distinction between a wholesaler and a distributor. And sometimes those words are used interchangeably and sometimes not. So perhaps we could get those next points up on the screen. So just to focus on these definitions for a moment, a wholesaler, and forgive me if some of you are very clear about this already, but we encounter many who are not entirely clear about this distinction between a wholesaler and a distributor. And those words are used in different senses, particularly in the United States market. A wholesaler is somebody essentially who supplies the entire retail sector with a whole range of books, a very, very wide range of books from as many publishers as possible. There's a wide range of stock holding, usually in small quantities per title. And when we're talking about the wholesalers here in the United Kingdom, it's very often the case that they are supplying quite considerably outside the UK market as well as within. And that's partly based on a very strong export tradition in this country. One possibility that crops up in relationships with these wholesalers is that though they are acting on behalf of all publishers, and therefore there isn't a very strong sales function going on, it's more a service and distribution function, they do offer paid for advertising in their seasonal buyer's guides. And if one is focusing on a very important title, one can take the opportunity to give that some airtime and mind share through those guides. So that's a wholesaler, somebody selling everything that they possibly can. And when we use the word distributor on the right-hand side of this slide, we're talking about somebody who's got a contract with a particular publisher or range of publishers to act on their behalf proactively into a certain market. Now, again, even within this, there's a distinction, because a distributor can be a company that simply offers logistical services. That is, that they stock hold and they invoice orders that they receive, keep records very often of royalties as well as other things, and collect, very importantly, collect money. But they don't necessarily do sales and marketing. When it comes to getting access to the market that we're talking about this evening, it's going to be important to have a distributor in the sense of somebody who doesn't just hold your books, but also sells them into the market proactively and will sometimes offer marketing services too. So we thought it was important to set out that distinction because market access will depend more on a distributor. And just a quick checklist on how to approach a distributor and to approach a distributor with credibility. First of all, you need to evaluate the suitability of your list for the market. And that is no mean feat because markets differ and sometimes the characteristics of those markets are really impenetrable. One cannot understand why it is that a certain market does well with a genre and another one will not. So it is worth, through that distributor and ahead of any approaches, informing yourself as much as you can about the market. It's important, as I say, when you're approaching these distributors, not to be offering them things which are not likely to travel well into that market. And one retains one's credibility by doing very good triage and saying, well, I recognize that this part of my list will do well and other parts may do less well for sometimes obvious reasons, sometimes less obvious reasons. The other thing that it's important to include in your own assessment is what might your list be offering as a proposition for the distributor? Will it be taken seriously because it represents a quantum that will interest them and contribute to their own operations? If so, then it's going to be worth pursuing. Then you need to decide which areas of support you're looking for. Is it purely the logistics side? I would suggest that that would be the case only if you had an alternative sales operation set up, and that might be one way of doing it. And then, of course, you need to consider whether you can support it with marketing, which involves resource and cost. So it's a matter of researching these distributors, and we've got some pointers to give you here. On the one hand, you probably want to be in a home, a distributor home, where the lists bear at least some similarity to yours, but perhaps aren't so extensive in that field that you feel you might be swamped. So it's a nuanced point of balance to find there. And then one needs to know what the terms of trade are and whether it will work for you, considering the additional costs, the demands on your resources, and these other elements that we've listed here. And then when it comes to the moment of thinking, I think I need to work with that particular distributor, one needs to put together a very good, clear and watertight contract, something that really does protect you in the relationship. So that's a rundown on how to approach a distributor. Obviously, it's a pretty whistle-stop tour, but those are the salient points. And here we've got a list of some of these distributors and wholesalers. And in fact, on this slide, it's wholesalers. I must be careful about how I use that language myself. Gardner's Books is the principal and most long-standing wholesaler in the UK. It's still a family-owned business, belongs to a family called Little. And they, in fact, if we jump over to the right-hand side of the slide, they also own Baker and Taylor UK, who are based very close to where I am in Oxford this evening. They're just up the road in Bicester. So Gardner's has acquired the UK arm of Baker and Taylor, which, as many of you will know, was previously owned by the Follett Group in the US, but the UK side has been spun off. And there's a bit of a rivalry, as you might expect, between Gardner's and Ingram, whom you see in the center of the slide there, because Ingram, whose mighty presence in North America you'll be most closely aware of, based in Nashville, have recently, and I'm talking about last fall, instituted a presence here in the UK to offer wholesale services to retailers. Meanwhile, in an almost tit-for-tat movement at the same time, Gardner's have said that they're opening up in the United States. And this comes against the background in the UK of quite a serious contraction over the first 2 decades of the present millennium in wholesale options. And in fact, there was one called Bertram's, which some of you may be aware of, which actually closed down in 2020. So this represents, these moves here with Ingram and Gardner's represent an expansion, a sort of swing of the needle away from that contraction, as if the market is saying, we need more options. Nielsen is here not so much because of its wholesale importance as because metadata is all, and if you are going to access the market, you really do need to be making sure that all these customers have got very good access to metadata regarding your titles. Next one, if we may. So then just focusing again on that distinction between wholesalers on the one hand, as I explained earlier, and distributors. This slide presents a range of companies that could be approached depending on your particular focus and interest to look after your physical sales in the UK market, and quite a few of them offer services into other parts of the world as well. The clue in some of them is in the name. You'll see in the middle of the left-hand column, Eurospan. They are particularly well established in the academic and educational markets, and they offer services focused not just on the UK, but in Europe. I won't go through all these now, but some of them are children's. Durnell focus on marketing. Booksource in Scotland is only a physical and logistics distributor. So if one went down that route, one would need a sales and marketing agency in support. The Combined Academic Publishers is an interesting operation which represents a range of North American university presses. And in fact, it also represents the University of British Columbia Press. So that is their focus, particularly on North American university presses into the UK market and further afield too. So we could move ahead, and there are obviously websites of all these organizations which give you deeper background on their activities.
I will say I managed to have a quick chat with the people from MMS who are specialists in children's distribution, And I asked them what they would look for if Canadian publishers were to approach them for distribution of their children's books. And they said that they would look for something that complements what they're offering already. So something that doesn't duplicate what they're doing already, something that would fill a gap that they don't currently have. So distributors will have different criteria for what they take on. Some might say, well, we want things that are similar. Others will say we want things that are different. But it's only through those conversations that you will get to find out. One other point that I just wanted to make is with IPG, for anyone that's with IPG, for US distribution, you can just tick different territories which you want to get your books distributed into. So if you're with IPG already, you may decide not to go with a direct UK-based distributor, because you can do that work through IPG as well. So just a couple of pointers there.
Thank you. And yes, and Bounce is also a children's specialist. It's worth mentioning.
That's right.
Yeah.
And there was, I think what we will do afterwards is supply a list of distributors, because this is not complete. There are many more, but we just wanted to give a sample of these. And we can supply a fuller list to Gabrielle to send out with the slides. So I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth about publicity and marketing. So referred to this earlier about making sure that you've got your materials lined up. Again, quite a lot of this you can do from Canada, but we do have a number of specialist agencies in the UK, both for PR and for digital marketing. If you've got a particular title that you're passionate about, that you think is going to do really well in the UK, you may decide to go down the route of investing in a dedicated PR campaign or a digital marketing campaign that is run out of the UK. So on the publicity front, there are lots of opportunities to get reviews for your books, either in the trade press or in the consumer press. Magazines are doing much more in literary reviews now, so they aren't necessarily dedicated book magazines, but they might be something like the Good Housekeeping magazine, which now carries a number of book reviews. We've also got some online culture sites. So there's one called Desi, which specialises in the South Asian community, and also carries book reviews. This is where a PR agency will have many lists of these opportunities, but if you spent some time, you can build up this list yourself. Newspapers have been traditional book reviewers, but we are seeing that the book review sections are getting smaller, but online they do carry some extensive book reviews. We have also got the trade press. So the Bookseller magazine is very active in carrying out book reviews as well. We then also have radio and podcasts, and literary festivals, and entering your book for book prizes. Let's move on. So these are just some of the places that you might consider for literary reviews, not forgetting, of course, things like Goodreads or NetGalley. NetGalley will reach many of those influencers and bloggers that you'd be keen to reach. I've mentioned the trade press as well. The Bookseller are particularly strong on carrying book reviews in different genres. And if you go to their online site, you'll be able to see the kind of books that they're reviewing. They're often quite far in advance. So thinking about providing your marketing materials and getting it out there quite far in advance is really important. The independent booksellers in particular will read the Bookseller to get a view of what's coming out in the future. 350 literary festivals now in the UK. You can be a literary festival tourist if you want. Many of them are small local events. and they will often feature local authors and writing workshops, but others are really big affairs that often attract the big names in literature and show business. There's always the debate on who pays for the author to travel to a literary festival. Those costs will often, more often than not, be borne by the publisher. We are seeing a number of niche literary festivals appearing, so crime writing festivals, history festivals, and children's festivals are becoming more and more popular, as well as the generic ones. Radio and podcasts, so there are limited opportunities for books on the radio, but we do have a Radio 2 book club and a number of radio shows dedicated to books on Radio 4, and podcasts are something that are becoming much more popular, both podcasts that feature authors talking about books, but also using podcasts as a form of marketing, so generating your own podcast to market your own books and authors. Thinking about book fairs and events, obviously, I'm sure most of you are aware of the London Book Fair, very much a business-to-business affair where you can meet the distributors and the wholesalers. They're very much there in abundance, not only from the UK, but from all over the world. It's a really good opportunity to set up appointments with these routes to market. You will meet the odd independent bookseller there, and there are dedicated bookseller lounges where they often hang out, and lots of seminars and events where you can learn about the market, particularly the UK market. Other events that should be in the calendar, which do actually offer online options as well. So the Bookseller Children's Conference, I think if you're in children's publishing and want to have a yearly update about the children's book market in the UK, then I thoroughly recommend signing up to the online sessions of those. They're often available on demand, so you don't have to get up at an ungodly hour to watch them. We've also got the BET show for anybody interested in the EdTech market. And we've also got the University Press Redux conference. Another conference that I haven't put on here, but certainly for those interested in the academic market, would be the Researcher to Reader conference, which has only just taken place, but also online. Marketing campaigns to think about. So social media, same as I'm sure in Canada, both paid and unpaid, reaching influencers. BookTok and Bookstagram are particularly popular at the moment. Outdoor advertising, which is for the very big books, of course, that's extremely expensive. But the UK is very open to brand link-ups. So there are many brands that really enjoy partnering with publishers, particularly on competitions and giveaways, and using social media to generate interest in both the book and the brand at the same time. As I say, we do have digital marketing agencies and specialists in the UK that can offer these services if you've got particular titles that you really want to invest in and get behind and don't want to do that yourself.
Very good, thank you. And now switching to a very brief and focused look at the rights market. And here we just set out what the framework of that rights market is, so that if you're a French publisher, you can sell world English language to a UK publisher for them then to exploit. But I imagine that if you're selling it from Canada, you might well want to sell North American English language rights separately. A UK publisher will rarely, if ever, buy UK only. They'll want UK and Commonwealth, which is a standard designation within international territorial rights. And of course, it refers to the UK Commonwealth. And in that reference is particularly picking out Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, India, those being, to all intents and purposes, dominated by the English language, including, as I say, India. You will, of course, within the Commonwealth want to retain Canada, and that is a very commonly recognized division down the Atlantic. And when publishers and agents talk about UK and Commonwealth, they mean exclusivity for the UK and those Commonwealth English-speaking territories, but that some of the markets, for example, East Asia, might be open to more than one edition. And the phrase "the open market" is used in that context. So that's the framework. And then if we just move on to how you might begin to access or approach those markets, that's right. There are various channels. And one of the questions one has to ask oneself as an SME, and even perhaps in other circumstances, is, have I the resource and the knowledge to sell these rights? If not, perhaps I should be approaching an agent to sell them on my behalf. Agents who exist both in Canada, as many of you will be aware, and there are plenty such agents either in the UK or the USA. The advantage there being, as I say, in terms of resource, where somebody with knowledge and whose particular focus is that activity is taking it on your behalf. However, even if one has an agent working on one's behalf, it can be very good to establish direct relationships with publishers, of course, in a transparent way with that agent, in a way that complements their activity. And going to book fairs and using online trading platforms, the last few years have really emphasized to us very powerfully how the value of face-to-face is very high and reasserting itself at the moment. And in fact, some of you will remember an extraordinary seminar in October 2021 at Frankfurt, when Canada was boldly making the most of its market focus guest of honor status at Frankfurt, where there was a palpable intensity to the value of the face-to-face. And we had some case studies there where the publishers concerned who'd partnered with each other were making it so clear that their business relationship was based on a very firm personal foundation that had come about through direct contact. Thank you. Moving just swiftly onto the academic market, it should be said that, of course, there is a very significant academic market in the United Kingdom, and it breaks down, as those of you who are closely involved in this area will be well aware, into higher education, that is the student market, and then research and reference, and finally professional. And those three channels are clearly exploited by the various companies that inhabit them, so that there are student bookstores on many campuses. We've got one depicted here, which of course is the most famous one in the United Kingdom, Blackwell's Bookshop here in Oxford, which now, in fact, as Emma pointed out earlier, belongs to Waterstones. So that retail market exists, and of course many students are buying also online from Amazon and other companies. And I think in this context, if we move on to the next slide, it's important for us to talk about the migration that has happened, particularly through the COVID years, towards digital in the textbook market in particular. And here we are listing a number of companies who are very active in this provision of digital texts to students, which, as I say, has seen a very considerable surge over the last 3 years. I won't go too much into these individual companies, but Cortext, now 10 years old, so many of these companies are new, is the largest UK provider of e-texts. EBSCO particularly is focused more on databases and journals. And then various of the others here are providers of either subscription services for academic textbooks or simply digital versions of those books, including rental as well as purchase. Do you want to add anything there, Em, or are we happy to proceed?
So the only other thing I'd add is, as in most other markets, the second-hand book market for textbooks is also quite high, and students will generally buy books in the first year, and you do see that decline and becoming more reliant on second-hand books for the years after year one.
And in a way, that is a parallel to digital rental, isn't it? It's almost as if you bought the book and then you pass it on. It's kind of a sub-rental model.
Yeah. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the children's book market. So still very much a print-dominated market. As I mentioned earlier, the YA market has really boomed thanks to TikTok. Just to say a few words about formats. So paperbacks are very much preferred by the high street retailers, particularly Waterstones and the indies, especially with, at the moment, the cost of living crisis. Price points recommended are very much under £10, and to have a standardized format for the books. So B format, if you want the best chance of getting onto tables and displays. The digital market is certainly starting to grow, nowhere near as quickly as the fiction market. So ebooks are selling, but not necessarily in great quantities. Audiobooks are being pushed. But one of the new things that's come up is physical audio, particularly for books up to age 5. So these are 3 companies which have launched their physical audio players in the UK market. So we've got Voxblock, we've got the Tonys, and the other name escapes me, Yoto. So those are the 3 physical audios. Again, what I will say about those is they are quite high price points. So really will only reach certainly a middle and higher income family. One little bit of advice a bookseller gave me is, if you are publishing books in series, please do make sure the number in the series is printed somewhere on the book. She told me it drives the booksellers crazy not having the numbers on the book. So it can be on the spine, it can be on the cover, it can be on the back, but as long as it's somewhere on the book. And also going back to metadata, particularly if you've got children's series, just make sure it's very clear in that metadata what number in the series that book is.
Perhaps worth saying about the physical audio that it's actually a bit of a comeback, because physical audio was a very powerful thing in children's, particularly with book and audio packs. And notwithstanding the power of streaming, this does seem to be making a bit of a strong comeback, and ebooks remain the lowest in the children's category. The children's category is the lowest in terms of ebook penetration.
And so, as we said earlier, there are a number of specialised children's books, bookshops emerging across the country. So many in different parts of the country. We have got the beautiful 7 Stories National Centre for Children's Books, which is up in Newcastle and has one of the finest libraries of children's books in the country.
Graphic novels, these slides show that there is a really powerful surge now in graphic novels, both adult and children's, and they're breaking new records and percentage increases that are very much higher. So that if that's part of your offering, this is very much a strand that's worth exploring. That final statistic on this slide is really quite remarkable. Manga sold more through the total consumer market in 2022, last year, than it did in the first 13 years of BookScan's full market data. So this is a format, this is a genre that is really making extraordinary increases. And similarly in the children's zone, again, the children's graphic novels, look at those percentages on the comparable data for 2021. So the earnings and the market penetration are really surging in this category, the children's as well as the adult. But it's quite remarkable the concentration of certain authors delivering very, very high percentages of the total market. So it's extremely top author led. Thank you. And that's just an indication of the revenues generated by the top 10 in the graphic novels. Very, very significant revenues, and an extraordinary range too within the genre of graphic novels. There are things that are coming from all sorts of different areas and subject focus.
So the schools market, like any market, is a challenging one, very much driven by the national curriculum. We haven't had a change in the national curriculum for about 8 years now. And so we're due a change in the national curriculum, which will hopefully bolster sales in the schools market. It's not a big market. There's not much money in the market. And as I say, it's very much driven by the national curriculum. It's worth noting for anyone that does have school K-12 books that we do have 4 separate national curriculums. So there's not one for the United Kingdom, but each of the devolved nations, England, Ireland, Scotland and Wales, have different national curriculums and different ways of purchasing the books. On the whole, they're generally driven by individual schools themselves. So the big publishers here certainly will have their own rep force that goes out meeting individual schools. We do have some consortia buying through what we call multi-academy trusts. So the other market to think about is the supplementary market. So thinking about school libraries, particularly in literacy. So that would be the main supplementary materials, as well as revision guides, but obviously linked very closely to the national curriculum. You'll see I've put a logo there for Peters, which is one of the main book suppliers to schools. And the categories in which the schools market operates are assessment, adoption, so thinking about which reading scheme you're going to adopt, and also continuing professional development and digital materials. Often when schools are purchasing, they won't necessarily just buy the physical books. They would expect to get the CPD and the digital materials included. Many of the big publishers here now will have their own platforms that schools can subscribe to, which has things like lesson plans, downloadable activity sheets, as well as supplying the physical books. So certainly when thinking about the schools market, you really have to go at it with a multimedia mindset.
Ladies and gentlemen, we know that some of you are interested in this subject, and I've got to be very careful not to reproduce some of the language that has been used by publishers to me about the effects of Brexit. There's no doubt that it's been an extremely adverse development for publishing and bookselling in this country, because the cross-border trading has become more difficult and more expensive. An advantage is put out by those who propose it, its proponents, that there is no requirement to implement EU regulations, those that are developed by the Commission and the Parliament in Brussels. However, our industry is one that is so aligned with the European industries, and it's the most important single trading bloc with which we work, that kind of freedom is not really a huge liberation. As I say, there've been increased administration and costs, wholesalers and distributors distributing into the continent of Europe, the other side of the English Channel. And it has to be said that it's very noteworthy that Gardners, who we were mentioning earlier, have actually set up a hub in France so that they've got something on European territory to enable that distribution, those distribution problems to be overcome. It's also interfered somewhat with the costs of attendance at European book fairs, but we will not be deterred. It's an inconvenience, but Europe is so important to us that we will press on and continue with our very close relationships and access to that market. I should just mention that Ireland is a bit of an anomaly here, because it remains, the Republic of Ireland remains a member of the EU. And many of you will have been acutely aware of the extraordinary political problems that have been created across the Irish Sea by Brexit, problems that weren't anticipated, or if they were anticipated, they were certainly not discussed. And Ireland, the status of the Republic of Ireland is that it is part of the UK market, the UK and Ireland market. So those problems about Europe do not apply when it comes to the Republic of Ireland. So we can move on.
So we've listed out some useful contacts here. Certainly you'll be familiar, I'm sure, with a number of them. The Writers and Artists Yearbook is particularly helpful for researching agents, literary agents, who you may wish to reach out to help you with selling translation rights. And the Association of Authors Agents as well will be another good source for that. And I've listed the Book Machine Creative Agency here. And the other thing that I would recommend as well is that they offer a monthly subscription to their site, which is a networking site, but generally the best offer that it has is an academy online training videos. And if you're interested particularly on things like marketing and publicity in the UK market, those training videos give a really good insight and really good examples of what's been successful in things like TikTok and PR campaigns and doing marketing in the UK on a low budget. So I would recommend having a look at that if you want to really get into depth and learn the tricks of the trade. And I think with that, we can move on to any further questions and answers that we haven't answered already in the chat. I think if any questions do occur to you over the next week or when you get the slides, please do send them to Gabrielle and she will collate them and send them to us. And we will endeavour to answer them for you.
Yeah, so this isn't a guillotine. The guillotine does not come down and then that's your last chance. If the spirit of our interaction, of our cooperation with you guys over there has already been established as something collegial, something where we will come back on issues if you're interested to engage with us on them.
That's great, Simon. Thank you. And thank you, Emma, for a great presentation. I see you've already answered quite a few questions in the Q&A window as they came up. So thank you. That's great. But yes, just to echo Emma, if anybody has any remaining questions that we don't have time to answer today, as we've already gone over our presentation time, please do not hesitate to reach out to me and send them to me then. I want to thank everybody for being here today. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Emma, for this great presentation. And thanks to the participants for joining us today. As well, I have to thank the Canada Book Fund for their help putting this on today, for funding the event. And of course, we are always happy to hear from all of you with any feedback. We'll be sending out a link as well for an evaluation. If you can send us your feedback on this session today, we would be very grateful. And if any of you did not receive the slides already, please feel free to reach out to me and I'll send them to you. All right. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Simon.
Thanks, everyone, for your time. Thank you for joining us.
These international connections are what really give reward in this area. And so thank you, everybody, for engaging with us.
Bye-bye.
Bye.